That was a long and drawn out one. I promise people that wasn't me this time. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasy. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Hawkings Austin, introduce himself. So can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about you?
Um, yeah, I guess I've worked for DoD military. I'm a contractor. Filthy contractor is the way DoD always refers to me. Been all the way up and down there, and I'm a rocket scientist in my spare days, and I've been writing for over 10 years. Got into it playing D&D and stuff like that, and I was going to write science fiction, but I can't get it past the censors, so I started writing fantasy, and so here we are.
That is awesome. The second part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we found them. So Hawkins is yet another author brought to us by the one, the only Mr. Declan Finn, friend of the show. We had a slew of cancellations because summer and babysitting and the like, and Declan hooked us up through his connections with Tuscany Bay, which is the publisher. Richard Pellini. I'm butchering it. He was a previous guest. You can check that episode out, and I butcher it there too. I promise it's a regular thing. Um,
And yeah, Tuscany Bay has saved a bunch of us from, well, there's been a lot of publishers go under. This is my third publisher. So we're real happy to be on Tuscany Bay. And Declan actually writes 4 bazillion books for every book I put out. That's an accurate count, by the way. And so you can read his stuff all day long.
that is awesome. He is a prolific guy. I think it's just he doesn't sleep.
Is that it?
He also doesn't have kids, which helps.
Yeah, I think the kids part was probably huge. Also, he's not traveling back to Italy anytime soon unless they carry a bomb in his luggage. That's a funny story all in itself.
Yeah, I think he told it one of the times he was here. Caught abroad. In a nutshell, dear listener, he got caught abroad right when the lockdowns from COVID happened, and hilarity ensued as he tried to get home.
Hilarity
So
ensued. His twitters are not suitable for broadcast. I'm sure.
absolutely, but they are enjoyable. So
But they are
before we get too deep into this interview, we have to ask you the religion question, sir. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Oh, what? No, I like all three. I was raised on Star Trek. I went to Star Wars in '78, and I guess I was a little late coming to Firefly. I really only saw them on DVD, so I did see Serenity in the theater. For universe's sake, yeah, if you could stick with the first three Star Wars, I'd have to jump to Star Wars. That's a King Arthur myth, and dang, I like Star Wars.
The books,
After that,
the books were good too before they got yeeted from canon.
yeah, I think my first Star Wars book was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Alan Dean Foster. I've read that when I was, uh, man, 13, 14. I mean,
I
a long
think
time.
for me, it was the X-wing books. I think it was Red Squadron. I think was the name of
Yeah.
the series. But it's been a while, and I haven't been able to find it since because I wanted my kids to enjoy it. And sometimes books we enjoyed as kids are hard to find when we're adults, and we want our kids to read them.
And my wife's got the Thrawn series up on her shelf. They're all signed by Zahn, um, another great author. Everyone should read Timothy Zahn.
He
Um,
is, and he's written some of his own stuff outside of Star Wars that's amazing as well, but sadly not as well read.
um, my favorite one, and it's because I'm involved, was the God Particle. What was that one called? Maybe it was the God Particle. It was something like that, where he had angels and demon particles, good particles and bad. A black hole was splitting particles into good and bad. It's a very interesting book, but the spacecraft, when it gets near, has a lot of upsets from radiation. Um, we had a conversation at a con back at Liberty Con back in '90 several, and he tossed that in.
Nice, nice. That's always a good thing. All right, and because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or the Wheel of Time?
Oh, that one isn't tricky. Lord of the Rings. And again, I read that when I was 16. I also read Wheel of Time, not when I was 16, but up through my mid 20s. Um, but Tolkien is still. I I know that nobody else should write like him because he breaks a lot of rules. He ought to be considered the most boring writer historically. But I will read his chapters for days because they are this images and he has such authority when he's writing that you know that culture existed. It's he had a skill that if I could do exactly what he did, it would still never get published. But I would feel really good about my writing to have that authority in writing.
Yeah, he was a league of his own. Um, so, and his biographies are pretty interesting about his time on the Somme, World War One as well, um, which sort of inspired Lord of the Rings, which is why I looked deeper into his time in the army. So, the we here at the Blasters of Blades, as you know, dear listener, like both the fantastical and the scientific. But Hawk, what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Okay, so story time. My dad decided I should start reading real books. Okay. Um, I learned to read by having books thrown in front of me, and I went through them fast. And mostly they were Hardy Boys and the equivalent. And so my dad decided at age 9 I had to have a real book. So he put The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein in front of me. And it took a lot longer to read than everything else I'd ever read before because it had real words in it. But once you, well, the fact is, it's a bad joke. It's almost a dad pun. Um, but once you get past the barrier of words, science fiction is um, everything. Fantasy, on the other hand, is a lot more accessible because when you're thinking hard science fiction, trying to build an incredible universe where the science works is hard, and it's a lot easier to build it for a 16 or a 9 to 16-year-old kid than it is for a modern adult like myself, who I know way too much about science, and I can keep pointing, oh no, that's fantasy, that's fantasy. Fantasy, your world building allows you a lot more flexibility because you don't have to say, would that power source ever work? No, it's magic. It works just fine. And I prefer that. I like my worlds real well built, but I like science fiction. I live science fiction. I'm I am still, my career is inspired by science. Um, I have secondary careers that are also inspired by history, and that's more fantasy esque because um, I'm kind of an Irish historian, and so Catalan historian. And okay, stop. I like history, and that inspires a lot of my fantasy work. So when I read a lot of history books, I'll write a fantasy novel. And when I'm reading a lot of science or I'm working with a bunch of military guys, I end up outlining big space battles and science fiction. And I'm trying still to not write things that will get me arrested. So I'm working on that one real hard.
You're too pretty for jail, so I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't look good in orange. So we're out of that. But not to do story after story, but um, I've worked in a classified environment for half my life, and I do know what science is capable of today. Unfortunately, that sneaks into the things I write. So I like to make sure that I write fantasy across the top so that I don't get arrested. Um,
That is a solid plan, and I can imagine how that could slow down the writing process when you got to wait for the censors to come back to you. So,
and well,
uh,
I put pure poison on John's desk, and he looked at it and he was like, "This is fantasy, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay," and he handed it back to me, and I'm like, "Dude, best way to handle it.
So, what is your first memory of engaging in science fiction then? Was it watching stuff with your dad? Was it their board games? I don't know if video games were available when you were young, but where did you discover the
There
genre?
were, but my first stuff. Wow. So my dad had a little black and white TV, and I watched Star Trek on the little black and white TV up in his office. My dad was a rocket scientist, as I am, and we. My dad is not a people person, and I won't say he was a bad father because he wasn't. He just didn't understand kids. And as I got older, our engagement used to be over Scientific Americans and things like that. We had to talk science because he really didn't know how to engage with a kid. And so by the time I'm 16, I was working at magnetohydrodynamic lab test, and we were running a plasma through a magnetic field to draw current off of it, and it blew up pretty spectacularly. But since I spoke Fortran at the time, I was working the console, and I was 16. So I've been in this rocket scientist, mad scientist business for 40 years. Uh, and so science is kind of like my life devotion, and it is following in my dad's footsteps. Who's following in his dad's footsteps? My grandfather was in oil distillation. So he worked as a scientist and an engineer all his life. When I was a kid, nobody knew what an engineer was. They'd ask me where I worked on the train. Um, then video games did come out, but not on the computer. We'd go to the arcade. Um, and I suppose I shot down enough nuclear missiles on Missile Command, but if anybody remembers that game,
I do.
I gotta move my hands fast. I gotta get all three missiles in the air. Okay. Yeah.
So you've heard all the rocket science jokes, I'm sure. Then,
No, I never heard of a rocket science.
so what is? Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I want to hear one.
No, I don't know any offhand. I just, the it's so easy. What's not rocket scientist, I guess, is the one everyone
Yeah,
goes
I'm not
back
a
to.
rocket scientist. I'm a mad scientist. I'm a angry engineer. It's not rocket surgery. But we used to make quantum physics jokes in school, so we really have a twisted sense of humor. I can do one of those. Want to hear a really bad joke?
Sure.
So, did you ever hear about the fans for the quantum physicist football team? They
No.
knew the wave, but they'd never been in an excited state.
I, I approve. See that now Doc's gonna be kicking herself for not being here, but she's doing the whole DragonCon preparation stuff, and
I got to get
but
back. Yeah.
it's a lot too much peopling for me. So, what is it, broadly speaking, about speculative fiction as a genre that you love?
Um, that's a. It's the Star Trekkiness. It's what are we gonna do to get off this planet? How do I build a better rocket? How do we get a moon base? How do we get Mars? I'm I'm trying to figure out how to make people and equipment work. And when I was a kid, it seemed an impossible hill to climb. And when I worked on the ISS, it seemed a pretty big hill to climb. And now that I'm getting a moon lander, I'm literally working on a moon lander. It's a place we're going. And for me, the fiction is just road mapping. What do we need next? How do people need to behave to live together in space? We can't be this way in space. Um, the things that work um, in the United States. We're a bunch of libertarian to, um, I don't care about hard right, hard left, but the average American is so freedom loving, libertarian. You can't run an anti gun platform in Colorado, the one of the more liberal states. This is very necessary for us expanding across the frontier. Will it work in space? Do we have to be different types of people to be in space? it's interesting to think about. In fantasy, it's easy. You can turn a button and say, "No, that people are different. These are elves. These are orcs. These are different." But in science fiction, you have to you have to pacify a planet to save it. And we've all seen Serenity, and at least that's at least one of your religions. That was a roadmap right there, um, a cautionary roadmap, but absolutely a roadmap. There's some, for a freaking western in space, um, they put in a real nice piece of thought in that, didn't they?
They did. So, because you talked about what's possible, and presuming you don't work for Elon Musk, you could answer this because you don't know anything. You're just, you know, somewhat more informed than normal observer. Do you think the Mars colony is realistic, or any extra Terran, you know, space
Yeah,
habitation?
yeah. So water is our current whole. I could do anything if you can bring 10 tons of water per person. That is absolutely unworkable. So, with the Equus technology and some of the others that I've worked on, I can drop it down to about a ton and a half per person per year. Now I've got to find for a colony of, say, 150 people, I've got to find 100 tons of water a year, or we have to come up with really better um, water reclamation methods. And that's kind of gross and nasty stuff, but it's doable. So we're going to be keep what was possible in the Apollo era 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. God bless, I'm old. What was possible 50 years ago versus what was possible 20 years ago versus what's possible in 50 years. I don't want to take 50 years for obvious reasons. Um, I want us to go faster. But I've got a I'm working on a different piece of the curve right now. Traffic control in space, landing and adjustment, and long-term circuits. Unfortunately, we're in a death spiral with circuits, and we're going to have to work our way through it. Um, you don't know what this means at all, but in the military and in space, we worked on radiation-hardened circuits and long high longevity circuits, very low fit rates, things that are going to be good. Basically saying, if I grabbed this laptop and take it into orbit, how long would it last? Answer: months. That's not good enough. Well, if I radiation hardened it and had a low fit rate, how long could I last? Maybe 10 years. Okay, well, as soon as we get that built, we get a design together, technology changes, and then it changes again, and then it changes again. And we're chasing it, and we can't keep up. They're building 3 nanometer circuits now. I can tell you, we haven't tested them. I've tested 7 nanometer, and I am way ahead of everyone else's curve because I am on the bleeding edge. But military are still at 19 nanometer, and here's the horrible secret: nobody's building them. There isn't a circuit building assembly. There's nobody cutting wafers in 19 nanometer technology. So when the Army is ready to roll out their hot new 19 nanometer rad hard technology, they haven't got anybody to print it. So we have problems. We have real deep problems that I'm chasing. Other side of the problem is the simple stuff. How are we going to get food? Can we grow potatoes on Mars? Probably not. But I like the concept. The Martian growing potatoes on Mars out of his own biological extras. Um, that's
So
lovely.
they actually, are you familiar with Dr. Becky? She has a YouTube channel. She's an astrophysicist from the UK. Does
I
a
have.
channel where
Does she think
so she actually said there's been some scientific papers on soil that has the same composition as what would be on Mars based on what we've got from the rover in very narrow straits that probably working on a theoretical level, but not practically, but on a theoretical level, she says it's possible.
we're going to have to
Um,
move metric F tons of bacteria and good soil over? And it's possible. And it's possible in your lifetime, maybe in mine. We'll have to to think about that one, but we keep hoping. I think it's doable, but the roadmap is still being laid out one bad book at a time, one good book at a time, one bad movie at a time. I can't
So
wait to
there,
see what.
so that's one of the things. I say this, and Scott Bartlett's a friend of mine who's also an awesome author, and I manage his Facebook group just because I enjoy his stuff, right? And I started doing that a while ago, but one of the things we share there is some of the science articles, and we just sort of nerd out over it. And it's amazing time to be alive with the science of it coming all, with the space race being revived. The issue is it's not spending money on it, because you hear left and right companies spending this. It's spending the money efficiently. Unfortunately, I think a lot of our corporate and governmental entities have forgotten how to do what they did in the moonshot, which was be lean and mean and make it work.
Yeah,
So we've got to get back to that.
and the government is absolutely incapable of doing anything useful. Do you understand? NASA is working on launching a giant Titan missile thing.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed that NASA, but they lost my confidence when they got rid of Pluto as a planet. What do they know?
Oh,
so,
the definition's worse than that. The definition of planet is so bad. My wife asked me yesterday, this article is talking about an exoplanet. What's an exoplanet? I'm like, every planet that isn't one of our basic 8 is an exoplanet, because they've screwed up the definition of planet so badly that only our 8 planets are planets. And she's like, well, what do you call a planet around another sun? An exoplanet. Why? Because it's a bad definition.
yeah, I've scratched my head at that. Like, words matter. I know this as an author, so when I see some of that, I'm like, yeah, could you maybe rethink that? So before we start, because we've already sidetracked with the science, and I love nerding out over this, and I'm guessing your fans listening are going to love this too. So obviously, at this point, anything about terraforming is so far into the theoretical range that even if we could start it, it would not. It'd be lifetime of lifetimes before it would have a noticeable impact. That old proverb, "May you plant trees whose shade you'll never sit on." That's what terraforming will be, or sit under.
Yeah.
So, but from a purely scientific level, do you think it's viable as an option to potentially terraform?
Um, the problem is the planets we have to work with, and Mars is has a deep problem. I've had there due to some bad planetary science in the 70s and 80s. There are some no-go subjects, so they'll argue with you. But Mars got hit by an object about 1 billion years ago, and it breached the core, and Mars is dead. I don't know that there's any way to revive a planet. That said, if we created, oh, I don't know, some kind of an atmospheric generation device, um, there's oh God, I can't remember the book. There's a horrible old book where they put giant furnaces on Mars, and they're on train tracks, and they're building their train tracks as they go along, cooking off the surface of Mars and building iron out of it, and building train tracks, and keep going, and they're spewing oxygen and sulfuric acid into the sky. You need an active atmospheric generation to survive. And currently, Mars doesn't have one. We humans might build one. Venus is gonna, Venus is bad. Maybe it's solvable. What I'd love to do is strip off Venus's atmosphere, stick it on Mars, and that would improve both of them greatly. Um, that I don't know a way that, unless gate technology shows up and we can open a gate on one and vent it to the other, and then throw in some water from Europa, and then hey, we could build a planet out of what we have in the solar system.
So the one that I saw was an article. PBS put it out a video on their YouTube channel, and they've got this guy. I can't remember his name, but he's got really long hair. He looks like a hippie, and he talks science on the video. But I'm there for it. But he did one where basically you use solar sail technology to prevent the sun from hitting Venus, which would cause it to slowly cool and then to get exponentially faster to the point where it becomes a barren ice land, and then you can import topsoil and basically build solar
Okay.
or ecosystem on top of the dead ecosystem, in which case you could create over time.
Yeah, the only worry I have about Venus is we're going to get neck deep in it and find that there's some creature out there that lives on this sulfuric horror story of an atmosphere, and they're all down there living just fine. And as soon as we discover them, and they could be bacteria the size of your fist or whatever they are, and suddenly Venus will be off limits. It's got such an active atmosphere that I would like to see that something lived in it, but I'd also like to see something lived in Europa, but what I like ain't gonna necessarily happen in the real world. I keep hoping we get good science missions.
Well, so the problem with that is we are, that you're not wrong to consider it, because we found microscopic bacteria in the sulfur flat, so we know carbon-based life forms aren't the only kind that are viable.
Right.
And so it's very possible that even more than microscopic, we just never know because we can't get down there. That things are possible on Venus, so it'll be interesting. Like I said, it's a crazy time to be alive.
Yep.
There's an
Becky.
astronomer that there's an astronomer I knew growing up. He ran the local planetarium, and that was his catchphrase was "Don't forget to look up," because it's we're learning cool new stuff all the time.
Yep.
So how did and we're going to get back on track with our scheduled interview now that we've nerded out and everybody's asleep. We'll wake them back up. How did your love of speculative fiction writ large transition into you writing stories in this space?
So D&D,
Okay.
D&D ate my life. Anytime my brother and I fought roughly 365 days a year. And the only thing that ever stopped us from fighting was sitting down over D&D where we fought other people. And after a couple of years of that, I started on beginner D&D and then got advanced D&D. And I had to buy the manuals in 80, 78. Yeah, that's been a long time ago. And we started playing, and we still fought. But then I got into high school some years later and found 4 or 5 guys who'd come over every weekend, and we'd hang out for 2 days and game. And these were this was my clique at high school, bunch of nerds. Um, and that kind of kept up into college even. And so I can, the Hawk superpower is a story on a dime. People would come in and say, we don't want to play whatever game we had set up last week. Hawk, can you tell us a story? Can you get one together? And I'm like, give me characters. They're like, all right, what are we going to make them up out of? Here's GURPS. We're going to use GURPS supers. Have a story ready in an hour. Okay. And then um, long story after that. So I'm still gaming. I'm not gaming as much now, but we do have a game this Saturday. When I was working for ASI, we had a period of underemployment, and I don't stop working. I got 4 or 5 other jobs while I was at it, but none of them were really paying money. And ASI still technically was employing me. We just ran out of our grant money. I was a grant writer for a living for 4 years, and we ended up failing. And so I didn't know what to do. And the wife said, take one of those stories you're telling Nick all the time, my son, and turn it into a book. And so I wrote it down, and it was 9,650 words. And I talked to Stephanie Osborne was my first editor. And she told me how to actually write, and how to do paragraphs, and how to do chapters, and how to do all the other little details. And 6 months later, I was employed. And so this took a lot of my writing time away. But over that 6 months, I'd knocked out about 100,000 words. And I sent that to a variety of editors. And um, finally, it got picked up by Superversive back in 2012. And no, I can't be right. 2014? I don't remember. Anyway, at some point, Superversive picked it up, and I wrote a couple of books for them, and then they went under. and I wrote a couple of books for Silver Empire, and they went under. And now I've written a book for Tuscany Bay, and let's hope they don't go under. They've got a second book on the way. I sit down and I knock out 1,000 words every few days, and it takes a year to knock out a novel, and I keep doing it. I don't know if there's a transition in there. It just is all part of the same storytelling.
Over time, that adds up. So do you still do short fiction as well?
I have, yes, I do. Have I tried to publish any? No, I have not. I had 2 or 3 of them. I'm really not as good with short stories. I've got to work on. I have this. I want the characters to have these long arcs with history and and I can't stick them all in a short story. So I have to learn to remove the arc from the short story and really focus on the 2 things happening and how that happens. I wrote a short story on pure poison, and I got that one, and I managed just enough shift in the arc that I felt like it was a real story. I still haven't found anybody who wants to publish it, but um, it's I'm working toward learning how to write short fiction better. I tend to put too much um, into the development so that the short fiction isn't working. But shoot, I've got a short story I'm trying to write for a pulp swords and sorcery book. I'll have to go look up who's the guy who wrote Chalk, and I've lost his name suddenly. Um, bless, he's a friend of mine. I've lost his name. Anyway, he's doing an anthology, and he asked me to produce something. Brave knight defending a lady, and I'm like, I've got about 20 million of those ideas. Let me write something down. And so I'm going to try to actually settle down and do that after I finish Court Human.
It's good to be ambitious. So many authors, and obviously, you work for the government, so, censor your answer appropriately. But many authors will let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So, are there any specific formidable moments that you think shape you as a storyteller?
Yeah, I write about family a lot. Um, it's nothing exciting. I've got divorce, marriage, divorce, marriage. I've got a lot of my own family and my family's issues, and to me, that family dynamic, especially in broken families, families with missing parents, there's a lot of that matters to me. Also, I mean, everybody in my novels is a person. Most of them are people I've met, talked to. Some of them, thankfully, are not because they're psychos. Yes, I have psychos in my story too. But most of the people in my stories are people who I've known long enough that I've built a model of them in my head, and so I ask them what they're doing and how they would handle these issues. And so um, I don't. I'm not a. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I don't have any major traumas. I grew up a poor ass farmer in the middle of nowhere. My dad happened to be a rocket scientist, but we're living on a farm in the middle of Tennessee, 30,000 a year income, 30 acres, and hand me down clothes and all that. Divorced family, no money, and 50 years later, I'm a rocket scientist and I'm making 6 figures, and I have the awesomest wife, and I have everything anybody could imagine. I don't know how I went from point A to point Q, but luck. I have. I fight. I fought professionally. I fight all the time. Even at 55, I fight at least once a week, and I've broken everything. And I still, well, today I'm walking with a limp because doing a step back lunge, I torqued my knee. But in general principles, I get hurt so often. I can't believe I'm not walking around with one arm missing, and I'm just lucky. I've spent my entire life blessed and lucky, and uh, I hope I don't bring too much of that in the stories because I want these my poor protagonists to live horrible, horrible lives. Um, It's really mean of me, isn't it? I really should be nicer to my protagonists.
Well, we'll come back to that. So what kind of fighting do you do?
Fighting, all of it. I had a dojo for 12 years. I did karate and jujitsu so that you could learn how to do eagle claw kung fu. I taught White Lotus Eagle Claw Kung Fu for a little over 10 years. Nowadays, I do fencing and SCA. They have a heavy fight that I really like, which is you wear full armor, carry a 3-pound stick, it's a wooden rattan sword, and beat the snot out of your friends. And it's a blast. Um, it's a LARPing, but dang, it is a blast to hit people with sticks and get hit back. And yeah, you better wear a lot of steel on your body because it does sting. Um, but yeah, I've done everything from boxing to kung fu to sword fighting. And I've been around.
So you basically just become a case study for why girls live longer than boys. Because I beat my friends up for the fun of it.
My wife does sometimes mention that. She goes, "Why did you do that again?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that does sound dumb, doesn't it? When you say it that way." I had the day I used to think this was my my hallmark day. We're at a camp out event called Gulf Wars, and I started the day with a tournament, and then I went to a fencing competition, and then I served lunch, and I worked in the kitchen for 2 hours, and then I went to the afternoon, and I fought in a heavy battle, and then went to court for a couple hours, and then which is not important. Went back, cooked dinner, and went and served at a bar that somebody had set up on the side of the road for 2 hours. And around 10 o'clock, I went dancing and then finally crashed at the fireplace and was finally too dead to move and crawled off into my bunk. And the wife's like, "Why did you do that?" I'm like, "I fought for 6 hours and danced for an hour in one night. And then I worked also for about 6 hours. How can you beat that for a day?"
There's the famous answer. It sounded like a good idea at the time.
Next day, I got to admit that the next day I woke up and went, "I'm going to lay here for a while, maybe a long while, maybe till tomorrow." Oh, I picked up some bruises across my ribs that rolling over would wake you up. So about halfway through the night, I'm like, "Oh, I can't lay on that side. Okay, let's try the other side." Oh, but man, yeah, I get to fight the lion. It's an old joke from a Monty Python, but if I get the opportunity, I get to fight the lion. Yeah, so I'm gonna die. Yeah, okay, fine. But yeah, and yeah, if they gave an opportunity to shoot somebody up to the moon to go on a moonwalk or go to Mars, yeah, I'd go. Damn straight. Would it kill me? I would check the odds first.
That always, when they talk about would you go, I keep remembering that scene from was it Independence Day where they go up to stop the asteroid, and they're like, what they ask him for their list of demands, and he's like, "I never want to pay taxes again, and I want you to bring back 8 tracks." That's going to be me someday if they let me go.
Yeah. There it is. We can have. I don't have a collection yet, but I've got my mother-in-law's coming to me, so then I'll still have something to listen to. Okay.
There you go. All right, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man.
From Max Tilsley, author of Brains, the post-apocalyptic pick-a-path adventure with more than 60 endings, comes the Susie Steele Adventures. Susie has a heart of gold, a set of bad dreams, and a hidden destiny. 6 months ago, Susie's father went to work and never returned, leaving Susie to her hobby of chasing away nannies. That is, until the mysterious and glamorous Cassandra roars into her life, driving a red sports car and promising to be the best of friends. When Susie stumbles on her father's secret lair, a world of magic, ghosts and mysteries beckons. Can she discover the truth, avoid being expelled from school, and keep a ruthless secret society off her back? She's to have a ghost of a chance. She'll need the help of her best friends, one grumpy cat, and a whole lot of daring. The Susie Steele Adventures from R. Max Tilsley. Book 1, The Steel Trap. Book 2, The Steel Bite. Perfect for readers 9+. Available in print and ebook.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. This episode is going long, as you've already noticed by our pacing, dear listener, but we're having fun, so you better have fun too, or else. So, transitioning from the writing side, have you got any cool fan art or had anyone cosplay your stuff yet?
No, that's a sadness. Of course, anytime anybody wears Irish gear, that's a cosplay for my gear.
That's okay. I'll take it.
I write. I'm an Irish historian, so I'm on all these Facebook websites, and we all argue about what century Lena's came out, etc., and so forth. But yeah, if I see somebody in a yellow dress, I'm like, yep, that's one. Now I keep trying to find some woman who's going to look like giant muscular, and have her in a yellow dress and have her be my Bray. I don't have anybody who could possibly be my 7'8" protagonist in that one. Waylaid is just too big. But if you meet somebody, I'll dress him out.
So, and if you do cosplay his stuff, join his newsletter and send him the pictures because every author wants to see that.
Yeah.
So, or tag him on Twitter. He's there too. So, and if you're not quite tall enough, stilts are a thing. People, be ambitious.
Oh, you know what? I don't care. I love anything. I am, and if anybody wants to talk about one of my books, just come on Twitter, annoy me, please. I can talk for hours about.
You heard it here first. Annoy him. I hope his kids aren't listening. All right. So, has anyone ever asked for autographs since you started writing?
Yeah, and well, I do DragonCon and I get the autographs. I sell a lot of books at DragonCon, and this year I'm not going because poverty, but in general, and I'm not poor, note, but we've had some deaths in the family, and I've flown out to Ohio, or had my wife fly out to Ohio 6 times. I am broke. I am going to one con this year, but I am having to miss my usual.
So, what was the first time someone asked for your autograph like?
Admittedly, I was looking forward to it because, hey, look, here's a book and it's signed. And when it was out of there, so I was at a panel at DragonCon, and a lady came up to me, a nice young lady, and told me I was her favorite rocket scientist, and I signed a bookmark that I'd handed them out at the con, and I just it was a Pure Poison bookmark, and I signed it for her. And I don't know what to think about being somebody's favorite rocket scientist or anything like that. I hope people like what I do, my stories or my rocket science, but I'm still not adept to the concept of having a fan outside of my own family. My dad loves what I write, and that's all I care about right now.
Well, admittedly, they probably don't know that many rocket scientists. So,
that's another one, because I kind of work with a dozen. So for me, it's not as tricky to meet a rocket scientist. I just have to open my door. Other people have a lot more trouble.
So my cousin almost went to school. She got accepted to a rocket science program, and she took nuclear medicine instead. And I'm like, no, this was my opportunity to say I was related to a rocket scientist, and you ruined it for me.
So my sister's husband had these bad pickup lines in college. And before he met when he met my sister, he was like, "Hey, I'm a rocket scientist." And she's like, "Hey, my brother's a rocket scientist." He goes like, "Oh, wait, no, that's wrong. I'm a brain surgeon." She goes, "Oh, great. My other brother's a brain surgeon."
Poor guy.
Yeah. He's like, "Okay, I'm an accountant." It turns out that was what she was looking for. My sister's,
I guess all's well that ends well.
yeah, my sister's the smart one of the family. And I'm saying this because I'm an outcome-based person. And when she says, I'm going to get a CFO and I'm going to make 200 blank a year, and we're going to have a house and 3 kids, and she lays it all out. And then 5 years later, she's on there. She is a smart cookie. And all she has to do is sit in the library all day. She's got an MS in library science. She hangs out in the school library, which is for her if you gave her an opportunity, what would you do during the day? Hang out in the library. Yes. So she plays around all day, gets paid for it, and goes home to the mansion that she wanted. She does well. My brother,
I could think of worse things than working in a library.
yeah. Now my brother, he's got it hard. He has no fun at all. Of course, he gets hot chicks all the time. That's kind of an annoyance, but because he's a surgeon, he has to put in 60-hour weeks and all this crap. It's really annoying. I don't think he's very bright about that, but he is a surgeon, and me, I'm just a rocket scientist, and I make a decent, really decent wage, which I'm not going to complain about. It gets in the way of writing, though. If I were a millionaire, I would work less and write more, but I probably wouldn't stop doing what I'm doing because it really is a lot of fun.
I mean, that's probably the only job where people legally let you blow stuff up.
I know. So it used to
Well,
be
one of the only. I
Yeah.
know some EOD people.
I was told that I let the I play with high tech, and I play with radiation, and I set fire to high tech devices. I really do this for pay, and now I have a team that does it for me while I watch. All I have to do is give them money, sit back, and watch things catch fire. It is really fun, and it's not my money, so it's all win.
So if you're listening, dear inner 12-year-old us, you really can make money playing with fire. Just go to school first and do it the right way.
I got 4 degrees in fire. Go for it.
Just,
I'm not even kidding. I got 2 double masters, all in fire. Well, thermal hydraulics, which is fire, instrumentation, which is looking at fire, plasma physics, which is really, really hot fire, and material science, which will set things on fire.
I like proof. So
I have fun.
I like it.
I got to tell you, I'm in the geeky. I tell people, and my manager, the person who works for me, tells me to stop telling this. So you guys aren't when I'm hiring people, I say, yeah, the analyst job is the most boring job on the planet. You're going to have to dig through 400 papers. You're going to have to be the most absolutely painstaking person on the planet. You're going to have to be really obsessive about your parts, and you have to be right all the time. And then you have to present this to a customer, and they're like, okay, I guess we could do that. I'm like, I've done it for 20 years. It's kind of rough. But nobody's going to let me stop because it's really what I do. And then we take parts, and then you get to go take them to the lab and set them on fire. And it's radiation is hard the first decade or so, but after that, it gets real easy, and you should do it. I need more radiation engineers. I've only got like 20, and I need another dozen. So hurry up and get your college degrees and come apply.
You heard it here first, people.
Yeah.
Go play with fire and blow stuff up, and you can get paid.
Yep. As long as you don't blow yourself up, which is there's an XKCD. We actually put this around at work the other day, which is it an energy source physicists are really excited about? And if it's yes, don't stand over there. And if it's no, maybe it's okay. But if physicists are really excited about it, maybe you should leave the room.
I like the jokes. So have you ever spotted anybody out in public reading your book since you started publishing?
Yeah, I was at DragonCon just last year, and I was with speaker of Lab Animals.
I know him.
And we're talking about, I don't remember, famine after the snap in Avengers. It was a dumbass panel, but we're having a blast answering questions and being dumb. And I reach over and I'm shilling a book, and I pick up Pure Poison, and the guy in the front row holds up Pure Poison. I'm like, you could buy 2.
One for your friend.
But yeah, but it's weird. I mean, at DragonCon, I guess I have fans, people who come at least to regularly to events I've done over the last decade or so. I've been there since '96. So I love talking, and that people like listening to me or reading my stories. That's amazing. I'm just glad, because I'm going to talk anyway. I'll talk for free. I'll write the stories for free. I'll just keep going. And if you guys like it, I'm still here. Great.
Yeah, the speaker to the lab animals, I met him at the last HonorCon. It's one of the few cons I've actually been to because it was less people.
Yeah.
And somebody did one of the usual anti-science, like, why are they faking all this stuff just to make money off of us with medicine? Because there's a panel about the difference between cryogenics and cryofreezing and all the different stuff people mix up. And he just looked over and he had the nicest smile and he's like, "Ma'am, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works." I don't know that I could have been as nice because I wanted to yeet the woman out of the room. And he was just so sweet as he basically told her she was a moron. I'm like, okay, I should take notes on how to be
He's
more,
got
I don't
remote
know,
control
polite.
mice in his lab, for God's sake. He's got the weirdest freaking mad science on the planet. Ah,
He's an interesting fellow. So, all right, and so
I have him leading Pure around the labs in Divine Dark in my third book. I have her go to North Carolina, and she's going to a lab, and um, the lab director leads them around, and I throw in a couple of hints.
nice.
I
All
try
right,
not
so
to bother
funny.
him. Anyway,
Well, I mean, if you let him live, then you didn't do your job right. You're supposed to kill your friends in books.
gotta kill them all, right? Yeah.
That's right. Get the full set. So, what's the weirdest or funniest interaction you've had with fans since you started writing?
Boy, you caught me off guard there. I don't know. I don't remember. I've had a few interesting ones, but mostly, yeah. No, I don't know. We talk, and yeah, that story. Let me think that one through real quick. So, a whole series of my books are Irish history, sort of. There's a fantasy element to it, but it's based very strongly in Pywar, ancient history that runs about 2000 BC, and a really nice older fellow. I'm trying to look at my hair. Yeah, he had more white hair than me, so I'm going to call him an older fellow. He comes up and he's talking about papers that people have written about Irish history, and he's got some disagreements with how I've interpreted that work. And I'm like, yeah, whose paper? And he gives the author's name, and it's my name. It's not Hawk Austin. I'd have another name. And I'm like, yeah, that I like that guy's papers. I think they're pretty good. And um, and I ask him if he knows, Handley's papers, Tom Handley, because I think that refutes what he's saying. And he goes, I'm Tom Handley. I'm like,
I wonder if we're related.
yeah. So this is just weird. And so that's why I said Handley. Handy. I don't
Okay.
know. It's been 20 years, for goodness sake. Maybe it was Handley. But he's an older
If
fellow.
he's smart, I'll claim him.
He's I think he is because I do read his papers. He talks about myth formation in ancient Irish history. I'm going to geek for a second. The Tuatha De Danann actually happened. The people came over on a boat. They did conquer Ireland. These are events that occurred. At a certain point, they stopped being treated as historical figures and became mythological gods and demons and things like that. And the process where that occurs, there's a word, mythalization, that he knew and he wrote papers on. And it's very interesting on how discussion of George Washington is going to progress from he was a guy who led armies to he's a mythological figure who symbolizes America in some way. And of course now you see him in a Ford commercial driving a Mustang at 80 miles an hour across the field. This is a mythological character acting in a deist manner. And so okay, so yes, I can geek out about history for ages. But yeah, that was very weird, and I wanted to go, dude, let's just share papers and talk. But um, someone's oh god, um, I love everything, every subject that's not medicine because medicine bores the snot out of me, and my brother's really big on it, and so is my dad. He's a nurse. Now he went from rocket scientist to nurse, and I can explain that some other time. But uh, you all the other science subjects, I have probably got a stack of papers on. I'm one of those guys who used to collect stacks of papers and read them and read all the Smithsonian articles and read all the, I'm just such a huge geek. I'm such a geek. Go
It
ahead.
is absolutely. It's absolutely okay. And if you wonder why you laughed, I found I wrote down the joke about rocket science. I remembered. It's, can anyone help me start a rocket science club? I'm having trouble getting it off the ground. I'm sorry. What
It's
can I say?
horrible. Perfect.
Dad jokes are the way to go. They're the secret to the universe. And I know I'll see myself out. So, all right. So, Hawk, this is where we ask you for your Reader's Digest version of your body of work. Can you tell us what you've written?
Yeah. So, Broken Man, Bone God. Those are ancient Irish history set in 1300 BC. They are about four cultures interacting in Ireland, and that would be horribly boring, except it's a ghost story where the priestess is trying to stop a ghost, and while the local king is trying to have her killed because politics, and that's complicated and difficult. But and Bone God has my best monster ever. It is a golem. It is a spirit so old and powerful that it makes its own golems, which is collecting a bunch of bones and assembling some kind of a figure out of them, wrapping it in skin, pouring in blood, and it sends it off to kill people. And of course, you can chop it up as much as you want, because once he's killed you, he'll take your bones. That's Bone God and Broken Man, and ancient Irish history, and someday Serpent King coming. I won't say coming soon because it won't be soon. And then the second series is Pure Poison, uh, Immaculate Corpse, and Divine Dark, and that's the Purity Wellman series. And they're about a lovely young girl who died in 1958, and she's back, and she can see the monsters that the veil keeps hidden from us. The veil is like a tattered rag for her, and she can see through it and see the real monster standing there. And other than that, why is she back from the grave? How is she going to get her life back when she's been gone for 60 years, etc.? So it's urban fantasy and a lot lighter in politics and all that than Bone God. And then my newest book just came out is Castle Brave, and it is military fantasy. I was responding to a challenge from Declan to write pulp, and I failed. I have not been able to write a pulp novel yet. I got a few, there are a few chapters in that book which are pulp, and the rest of them are my usual too much politics, too much talking, and really interesting characters. Um, it's military, and it is, as I put in my dedication, um, the it's for my friends at Ditra who, despite knowing all the wonders of science, still realize that anything that happens on TV and movie would require magic. There, I fixed it for you. So it's elven rangers rescuing a dragon from a castle. And it's a blast. It's fun. Has some of my favorite characters in it and some of my least favorite. You should hate them along with me. And that's it. 5 novels. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 6 novels. And I've got Core Human coming out as soon as somebody buys it. So it's being passed around as we speak.
All right. So if any publishers are listening, scribble out some offers, and he's all yours.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've talked about the your body of work, we're going to talk specifically about Castle Brave, which is why we're here today. So, what is the premise for this universe, and how did you come up with it?
Okay, so I came up with it because I've been doing military and I was not going to write science fiction anymore. So saith my boss. And also the reason I started living under my pseudonym because my boss was tired of me putting my name on things at DragonCon and etc. He said that was no longer acceptable. So I went full fantasy, and I'm still writing what amounts to a modern military novel. These are airborne rangers. They jump out of an aircraft. They infiltrate, assassinate, and remove. I used magical analogs for most technology. The year is roughly the same. The level of society is similar, except the society is the Vanir elves, and they're being attacked by the Aesir elves. And the Aesir, using dragons, have wiped out half the continent. And only now are we finally have we the Vanir killed off the red dragons and have pushed the Aesir forces back to the mountains, and they're about to push them back over the mountains. At which point the future changes. And by that I mean they use sci-fi, psionic future intelligence. Because it's military, everything's an acronym, sci-fi. Sci-fi looks into the future, and they've seen us winning this war, except now they don't. Now there's dragons in the sky. Now there's cities burning to the ground. What's going on? So there's a mission to I don't want to get into the entirety of it, but there's a mission to rescue what may be a pivotal captive of the Aesir, a dragon. And they have a civilian along. And anybody who knows Army knows how much they love having a civilian advisor along on a military mission. And there's 20 soldiers and the usual mix of perfectly normal people and psychos. And they have to enter a castle, find this civilian, rescue it, which is not a mission that special forces get applied to, but that's been added to their repertoire today. And they're not real happy with that. And then they're going to blow everything up. And that's the simplicity of the mission. Obviously, problems mount. Everything's craps up, partially because there's a civilian along, partially because the enemy are putting a lot of effort into this. And at the middle of this, do they need to just turn around and go home and take the loss? And that's the real question. And they fight it out. And there's a lot of interesting things happening. The lieutenant really is that smart, and he isn't going to get them all killed. That's a trope if you know that one. The smart lieutenant that gets everybody killed. They hate lieutenants. Of course, everyone does. But he's a really smart lieutenant. And they have the psycho who's there just to kill people, and he's really good at it. And they have magic users. A kind of a cute inversion of that trope. I kind of liked what I did with it. So imagine you could heal yourself, right? I mean, you're a magician. You have a heal spell, right? Sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm following.
So you go out to the gym and you work out and you knock out 50 push-ups and you collapse. You've torn your elbow. Heal it. Now do 50 more. Do another 50. When are you going to stop? How long a workout can you do? So we've got a guy in top-notch armor, Sable Hawk armor, because hey, I like the name, and he's a wizard, and he's about 6'8", and he can lift 400 pounds before he turns on the armor. He works out 8 hours a day, literally all he can do, and when he turns on the armor, he can kick down walls. And he has a really good time at it. So he will be leaping through the air, smashing people, knocking down walls. It's he's not real good at the elvish side, but he's real good at breaking things. But it's a fun book with lots of great fights, and you don't know how it's going to end, except I do have a hint in the title. And maybe that's too hinty. Do you know what the Is Castle Brave too much of a hint? No, because nobody knows what that is, right?
No, I don't. I'm not following that one.
Okay.
That went over my head.
So I'll tell you what, I had a reader read the novel, and he said, I like everything except the title doesn't sound military enough. Why did you use Brave? You should have used Castle Bravo. That would have sounded military. It would. You know why? Because it was. Castle Bravo is a military event. In fact, it's a DITRA event. Actually, they called it Nuclear Weapons Organization um, when Castle Bravo was going off. But if you look it up, it's a hint.
Okay. We'll check that out later. But all right. So that is the story of how you came up with the idea. But before we dive too deeply into these characters, we're going to take a moment where we look at this sexy cover, and you're going to tell us the story behind the art. So let me do that. Put that on the screen.
That is really nice art, isn't it?
I like it. Looks like a painting. I thought it was a mistake at first when I saw it.
It's
okay.
If you had the full book art, this is one of those cases where I could turn on I have the painting up on my wall. Paul Maitland did the full painting for me, and there's some ruins off to the left of the guy here. And in the full hardcover, it's going to be a wraparound, so you'll be able to see some of that. But Paul Maitland is a artist I met at DragonCon some years ago, and I asked him for this cover, and we talked about it a lot. He didn't do everything I asked him for, but we got dragons, we've got the tower, we got a guy in powered armor, a sword, a cape. Yeah, this will do. If you read it, you'll see all the things he got wrong, but he didn't read it, so don't expect an artist to read your book. They don't. But he did a really, really nice painting for me, and I hung it up on my wall. It's absolutely fantastic art.
Okay, so that is it looks good. I really like it. All right, so now let's dive in deep. We're only an hour in, and we're just getting started, people. So, what can you tell us about their 30-second elevator pitch? What would it be?
This is Elven Rangers rescuing a dragon from a castle. The complexities of that fill out hundreds and hundreds of pages. The heroes are mostly elves with a few humans mixed in. There's magic. There's magical guns, magical armor, magical power supplies. There's also perfectly normal knives and swords. And the enemy includes Jotun, which are giants. So if you can imagine, 8-foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyed guys out of the north who have armor every bit as good as ours, possibly better, and also all the magic. And they like to ride dragons. So they are not what you'd call your normal villains. They are absolutely soldiers of the most powerful tanks that you can imagine in a fantasy-ish world. And then, of course, we also have some elves among the enemy too, and Bogwin, which are Bogwin is a early Welsh goblin. So I use that for a little bit of difference. What do you want to know about all this? There's dragons, man.
Dragons are awesome. Dragon. So, besides the dragon, what do you think makes this novel special?
It's wow. There's a lot special about the novel. The part that I really like is that I think I've captured the military unit, and you'll really like how the characters interact with each other. They have a chemistry, and the civilian, as she comes around trying to arrest soldiers, and it finally dawns on her that she's on the wrong side of this. I think you'll be waiting for that moment, because I can't help liking the civilian, but I also can't help hating her constantly for being wrong every damn time. And so you there's people who are right and wrong, and in war that's not the point, and you have to the characters in any of my books are all character driven. I write characters. I know people. Most of my characters who aren't psychos are people I've met, and actually the psycho I kind of met once too. So they're all real people, despite the fact that they're elves and other things. And frankly, if you're going to write a game later or something, I didn't balance this. The wizards are woefully overpowered. If you want to see a wizard that can kick butt, chop people down with swords, and blow shit up, this is where you get it. This is no wussy wizard who says, hey, look, I'm going to come out of the dawn here in 2 days, and I'll bring some cavalry with me because I don't got any real magic. No. This is a wizard who's going to be throwing fireballs and mowing down enemies. This is good stuff.
Okay. So what tropes do you feel like Castle Brave hits the best?
So the lieutenant trope, I've already had a fight with a lieutenant about it. So the lieutenant trope is my central trope of this novel. And the lieutenant trope is the lieutenant comes in with a degree, he's super smart, and he doesn't know soldiering. And he's going to get everybody killed. My lieutenant has a PhD. He is super smart, and he might get everybody killed. He's again, there's moments where you're going to hate him because he's so wrong, and there's moments where you will rejoice when he is correct. He's really good at what he's good at, and sometimes he's really wrong. And so this is it's a trope, and it isn't just he's not a cardboard figure. He is absolutely a real person, and you'll know that from chapter 1. He is chapter 1, and he's as real as it gets. But it's a trope. I took the weak wizards trope and completely flipped it because I'm tired of weak ass wizards, and so I made the most bone crushing powerful wizards I've ever had. What else is there? And I got a psycho killer. One of my corporals is so wizards are very long lived, and he actually lives from the time period before the Asir took over half the continent, and his home, family, forest, everything was burned to the ground by red dragons. He's on the other side of Snapped. He has used to be a very caring, loving parental figure with, well, he's wealthy and had great holdings and all this. Now he is a corporal and he carries a knife.
Knives will get the job done.
Yep. As anyone in infantry knows, knives are there for a purpose, and he's that guy with that purpose.
Absolutely. So, what subgenres besides fantasy do you feel like this novel slots into?
It's military. There is a little epic fantasy in it, and that I hope that I could tie enough together to build an epic fantasy series out of this in the future, maybe. But right now, epic is kind of on the side. Military fantasy. The colonel is the colonel. The captains are captains. Everybody here is a military person that you would recognize. If first sergeant, the top is my first sergeant. If Elenon isn't the most relatable person that you've met, I mean, he's a first sergeant, and I'm sure you're infantry or were, right? You know this.
Yes, sir.
You know enough first sergeants, or you've seen a few, right? This is
I tried to avoid them, but yeah.
There's that point too. And there's a guy comes up to him in the hall and starts yelling at him about what meeting he's supposed to be at, and he sits there smoldering, going, "This is going to go badly for him. How many minutes do I have left? can I take him out to the track and run around the track for an hour? I really, really want to do that now. Okay, no, I'm going to miss the meeting. All right. But yeah, don't if you know a first sergeant, don't charge him and start screaming problems at him. That usually is poor. But otherwise, no, he's a guy who is very effective at being running a unit and infiltration. He's the most invisible guy on the planet, and he's good at killing people. But also, he runs a really good group and has obvious good camaraderie with his men and his sergeants. And I mean, he reminds me of guys at work. And at Ditra, the first sergeant is barely a rank, you know. Lieutenants, they consider the trash feeders that they allow to walk in the building sometimes. Have you gone to the Pentagon?
I have not.
I don't recommend it, but I lived in the Pentagon for a few years, and lieutenants are the people we play all the pranks on, and nobody below lieutenant colonel does anyone even ask for directions. But I know plenty of soldiers who've been assigned to my units, but I admit that I like hanging out with the dumb lieutenants and the sergeants and it's where I've been.
I can appreciate that. So let's talk about the story itself. What can you tell us about the main character? It sounds like you've got a cast of characters instead of just one main character. So what?
I do a multi-viewpoint, and my main character, the main protagonist, is First Sergeant Alanon, Top, and the other main protagonist is the lieutenant, and Calassian, and he's real smart and really assigned out of his depth because he's intelligence, and he's assigned to a mission because reasons that will be really apparent from page 10 of the novel. And I'm not going to get into it, but they have different viewpoints. They clearly see warfare in a completely different way from a pure staff intelligence. He never gets out of his dress blacks, and the guy who's used to crawling on the dirt for a living. And there's also split scenes in there with privates who have powered armor, happen to be magic users. There's a scene in there with a guy who's a psycho and is going out there behind enemy lines to kill people. And there's very limited scenes from the major. The major isn't a military rank in this; it's a civilian rank. They have adjuncts and majors on the civilian side, and so she's a cop, effectively, and she doesn't approve of anything that's happening in this book. I will tell you directly, knowing her personally, she doesn't approve, and she makes that very clear from day one. Point one: why the hell do you think that you get to record everything I'm saying? Click. Recording ends. Okay. She's a special, she's special, but, and a cop, and we got other, the point of view shifts because it's an operation, and I could have left it from just Top's point of view, and I did write it that way the first time, and I thought, man, you're losing the point of view of everybody. Top is he's a soldier, and after 10 years of soldiering, of war, he is hard in the way that he doesn't worry about killing people. It doesn't keep him up nights. He's done it a lot. This is his job, and while he thinks about not always doing this forever, he's not going to spend most of his time going, should I do this or should I do that? He takes a real straight, I'm on mission, this is what I got to do. And I couldn't write a soldier that spent most of his time wondering if he was morally right or wrong. I can't write a soldier that way. I admit there are soldiers like that, but I can't see a first sergeant spending half his mission wondering about the morality of his actions. it's not it doesn't feel right to me. And so I brought in characters who are morally wrong, and I brought in characters who are going to pass moral judgments on what soldiers do, and a guy who's just simply not hardened to warfare, and really, it's his first time, and he's going to have the first step lieutenant problems of how do I get into a fight? How do I stop fighting? How do I handle these things? And so I wanted to bring in a lot of different viewpoints from people who I know and who I want to express them in this book. And I think I did. So you're going to get all of those viewpoints during the fight from, well, and even then if I throw in the private, people who just are having a damn good time fighting. And that's not a real healthy way to feel in the middle of a battle, but different strokes, and there is a wide variety of viewpoints in this novel.
I mean, it's not unrealistic. Some people start to like it if you see a lot of activity. So you talked about your primary characters. Were there any secondary characters in this novel that were especially memorable to you?
So, okay, Umbra is my favorite, and I do love her, and I have to be very careful because I know what happens if you love a character. It's really bad. Don't love your characters. But I do love Umbra. She is she's in the Overlook group, so her mission, along with the Psycho Corporal, is to make sure the exit paths are clear, which is getting behind enemy lines and killing anybody who might possibly be watching the exit lines. It's a extraction piece. It's called Overlook, and so she's part of Overlook, and she has a bad case of hero worship for the Psycho Corporal. Um, she calls him Grandpa, and she wants to grow up to be just like him. And that's about the most unhealthy attitude of anybody, because you shouldn't want to grow up to be a psycho killer. But Umbra is just so lovable that I just adore that girl, and I really hope she isn't a psycho killer when she grows up. But depends on how many books in this series.
All right, that's always a noble goal. So, what about the bad guys? Um, Obviously, no spoilers, but is this a man versus nature? Although it sounds like you have clearly defined protagonists in this novel.
So there is the villains are every bit as good. I don't want wussy villains. My enemy soldiers are not being rolled up because they're wusses. They are absolutely as good as our team, with exceptions. Obviously, we have some better people and some worse people, but in a special forces unit, you expect to have some of the best. So our best are as good as these guys, but these aren't rollovers. The Bogwin have powered armor. The Jotun have powered armor. The Jotun are 8 foot tall Nordic heroes in powered armor. That they call it frost skin. It's unbreakable, clear steel like material, and they make armor out of it, and it's powered, and they're super strong, and they're already 8 feet tall. And so, yeah, these guys are harsh, and there's other things I'm not going to get into, but there's then the villains, their generals, the Asir, the Queen of the Asir. So I have AI, Crystalline Intelligence (CI) in this, and the CI that they have found over in the Asir lands is very old. It's several thousand years old, and it's evolved, and we're calling them demons now because really what they want to do is kill everybody. But um, so the Asir are using demons in their weapons and in they're implanting them in some of their generals. So the generals have, I think David Drake used this trope, the 3,000-year-old computer that tells you everything your opponent's going to do ahead of time because it's just that smart. Um, that's what these demons are. They're super smart. They also have future sight. They also have every knowledge of technology. And so the villains are, well, the antagonists. They're not necessarily villains, but they are definitely on the other side, and they have got really powerful equipment and abilities, and it's not a walk in the park. It's not one of those where Conan the Barbarian wanders into a few hundred enemy and lays about with his sword until they're all blood and guts laying about. This is one-on-one is likely to be fatal. The advantage of special forces is you don't see us until we're gone. The extraction team has cleared the exit way. You've performed your assassination, and you're on your way out before anybody, there's dead bodies on the floor, and you're on your way out, and nobody knew you were even there. That's the way you properly run a special forces unit. Obviously, there's some issues with this one. There's a civilian involved. There's crap. But, yeah, the antagonists are going to be powerful and interesting. They're people, too. They're not nature. They're people. They're, Viking warlord types, Nordic warlord types. People you could get to like, and you'd rather they were on the hero side than the enemy side. I really like them. I wish I wrote a book where they were the good guys.
So if people buy enough copies, maybe your publisher will ask you to do that. Write it from their point of view.
Yeah, I think I'm going to write another one. I thought of a Bogwin war machine, and it's buried under a lake. And, I bet you they know where the Aesir know where it is. And you know what? It would be really horrible if they got it back out. I think there's another book here. But I haven't started writing it yet. But it's most of the time I have the story completely written in my head before I start typing.
That is a very convenient problem to have.
Yeah, if you ever come to one of my games, you'll understand. My son played the lieutenant the first time I role played this out. I murdered him though.
you role play out your scenarios to get it straight in your head?
To build the world. I don't have to worry about the I don't want my scenarios are more complicated. What I don't have is the world. And people will say, well, what I want to do is this. And I go, well, of course you want to do that. Let me add that to the world. And so I start off with brick and mortar fantasy world. And by the time I'm halfway through their first adventure, I've got, you've got a Scion cloak on, of course. It's Mark II. You're doing the best possible invisibility that's available at this time. This is the how I build my worlds is I let people run around in them and break things. And at a certain point, I'm like, oh, I like that. I want to add that to the world. I want to take that out. But the story itself, nobody's dumb enough to be one of my protagonists. They get beat up and killed.
Okay. Speaking of characters and getting beat up and killed, we told you we'd come back to this, but if your characters met you in a dark alley and they knew who you were and the torment you put them through, how do you see that interaction playing out?
Oh, that would not be good. That would not be good. No.
Especially not that OP wizard.
Yeah, that would be bad. No, if they thought that killing me ended their problems, I'd be dead. Yeah. No, Purity wouldn't kill me. So in those books, Purity wouldn't kill me, but she'd really make me cry a lot because she'd have to really have a talking to and come to Jesus moment, and I would have to stop writing such evil books to her. But
that would be an interesting conversation to film.
Yeah. Oh man. Anyway, I was going to say I can get Jennifer to do the other side of it. If I just figure out never mind. I would write a plot for anything. That's a fact.
Okay.
I've got Jennifer planning. So Jennifer, JD Voices does my voice acting for Pure Poison, and she wants me to write a book solely so a scene that she's come up with gets into the book.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
So this is a part where we take a peek behind the curtain and we ask, were there any cool scenes that you had to cut from this book that would be entertaining?
Yeah. So for reasons, anyway, the top ends up on a horse riding into battle, firing a Bogwin, an antique Bogwin flamer, just to protect the rear guard. And I rewrote that 3 or 4 times. He really did get a hero on a white horse moment, but it just couldn't work. It just didn't fit the narrative the way I had it built, and so I finally ended up having to ice it. And I don't regret it. It didn't fit, but it just didn't fit. But it would have been real cool. I don't get to spend enough time setting things on fire with flamers, so any more time would have been good. If you can imagine a shotgun with the shells are crystal magic, and you when you pull the trigger, it fires a beam of fire out about 50 yards. You can really set shit on fire.
So if your DoD job falls apart, you could always work for Elon Musk. I hear he does fire flamethrowers.
Yeah, not a flamethrower. I needed not a flamethrower desperately.
Me too, but I couldn't get one before they sold out. So finally, what can you tell us about the universe? Is there anything about this world where the story takes place that you haven't already covered?
So a lot of this, when we get psychics, they start looking into the psychic plane where the gods are and how they look. And I think this is going to be a very interesting area to explore. Maybe other worlds attached to the psychic plane. I literally haven't explored it too much because I didn't want to make new rules and then find out I was breaking them halfway through. So I limited it to areas where I was really confident I knew all the rules. But I suspect the psychic plane is going to be interesting in the future.
Okay. So you mentioned right now Castle Brave is a standalone novel, but you've got ideas for the world. So what would it take to get you to expand that world into the more ideas that you have?
More time in the day. I have 7 novels on my list that I want to get written. Some of them are have-tos. I really have got to get Serpent King out before my dad dies, because he's really been waiting on that sequel now for several years. And then I want to get I'm an historian, and La Gran Companyia Catalonia is very interesting, and I would like to write that as a space opera. And now that I'm not at DoD, I would like to make that spaceship battle I've been wanting to make. And there's a few others, but yeah, I actually have a couple of fans of the Purity Wellman series who actually want me to write book 4. And so I do want to get another book in on Castle Brave, but it's probably going to just percolate in the back of my head for a couple of years before it really pops out. Unless, a bunch of fans say, hey, I've got to have another book of that series, and then I'll see what I can find. First, you got to come up with a title.
Titling can be a very difficult part of the writing process.
I'm the worst. I have to have a title first. I don't know why. The book doesn't gel for me until I have a title, and then suddenly the chapters start falling out, and then I have 20 chapters written or outlined, and then I start writing. And the only one that hasn't done that is Serpent King, and only because it originally was The Blessed Queen, and I had to change the title because the hero took a left turn in the middle of the damn book, and I went and punched him a couple of times. It helped.
I mean, you got to have those healthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah. Well, luckily, the hero of the protagonist, one of the 2 protagonists in the Broken Man series, is actually my son. So I do get to punch him. He's 26. I'm not beating a kid up. I can punch him. He can punch back, technically speaking. He's not good at it.
We'll pretend he's not listening and he doesn't know you.
Oh, he knows. I laughed his ass off. I told him what happened at the middle scene, and he said, yeah, but wouldn't I? And I said, exactly. You changed the entire plot right here in this damn scene, and you redid this. And and he's like, yeah, that sounds right. Okay. Anyway.
It's the joys of having kids. You get to kill them in literature, or beat them up, whatever. So we know that every literary universe has their own internally consistent rules for science, technology, and magic. So what sort of magic can we expect from these books?
Well, I have so magic requires a power supply, and it requires a glyph, mandala, I call them. And there's 9 mandalas of magic, and so there's 9 branches of magic, and however much magus you can put through a mandala, that's how you make spells, plus a few words here and there, and maybe a motion. But in general, spells are made by putting the source of magic through a mandala, and they're pretty simple. The air and earth magic, air is force, just shoving things around. Earth magic actually adds kinetic energy to an object, adds momentum to an object. So they're very similar, but you have to consider the differences. Fire and cold are essentially the same magic. One's run in reverse, just adding heat to objects or removing it. It's pretty simple magic field. The psionics gets a little complicated because it really involves a telepathic connection to the psychic plane to look into the future. And death magic, weirdly enough, really is just a measurement of how much magus, how much energy is coming at you. And so if things happen in the future with a lot of magic or a lot of death, you can see them in the past on the psychic plane. Which is kind of one of the underpinnings of this book. But basically, that's why psychic, or at least magical energy, is called death magic, because large amounts of death release large amounts of magic. Anyway, that's the sort of stuff. It's all written up in the back of the book. I have extra appendices in the back that go through all of it, because there are rules. I can't do anything without rules.
This is how you get your super nerd credit. You add appendices to your books.
I know.
Even your fantasy.
All the magic systems. And since I have a different magic system in every world, you get to read a bunch.
So which magic system would you want for daily use, and why?
Man, I hate magic. Yeah, no. No, if magic was as easy as envisioning a mandala and putting power into it, I would be a super wizard. But yeah, it would be a great system, but it basically becomes science in the end. That was the whole point of it. It's science. In the end, the wand, the Mill Standard 1911 wand, has a button on it, and when you push it, it automatically projects the mandala, so you don't have to mentally memorize any of them. And so, Mill Standard, it's science.
That is something I had never encountered before in doing these interviews about the magic. So, all right. So your book clearly has fantasy creatures in it. So how did you go about creating those? Were they inspired by your nightmares? Did you let nature inspire you? Create something out of whole cloth?
I wish I knew. God, that's it. No, the dragons are people. They're just big, super magical people. And I treat them that way throughout. I don't bring in what you'd call magical creatures otherwise, except as there's a mad scientist on the bad guy side, and he has, in fact, in the past, turned perfectly normal creatures into magical, dangerous creatures. Because he's weird. I don't want to explain what he's doing. He's trying to become a god. It's a little weird. But no, I didn't do a whole lot of weird magical creatures. It's people. And yeah, okay. I do have a history of them. This person existed first, and then they created this race, and then this race is a subset of this race. But nobody cares. This is, I have it all, out on my wall, but nobody cares. I could geek out my own science, but nobody, don't let me. Go on, find something else to ask.
Okay, well, clearly this interview is winding down. But before we let you go, was there anything about Castle Brave that we didn't ask you before we wrap this up?
No, maybe. Let me think about that. That's a good question. It's a of all my novels, this one is going to be the easiest to step in, not know a damn thing before it starts, read it to the conclusion, and put it down again. It is a absolutely self-standing, perfectly good by itself novel. You don't have to know anything to walk into it. I have a few insider jokes. If Mill Standard 1911 is an insider joke, or if it's just a really stupid reference. Um, but yeah, I don't ask anything of the reader. It is all given to you. Other of my books, you'll have to try to figure out a lot of stuff. This one, boy, when the ending shows up, you're going to say, yeah, that's what I thought. And it's great. It's absolutely worth it. And you'll love it.
Okay. And before we let you run, we do have this standard question that I normally forget to the last minute. But what would the age range be for this story? Like, what would you say the target age for people reading? Because obviously we have some families that listen to the show together, and so they're always asking, is this appropriate for my kid?
Yeah. So I've got a person in here who cusses, and boy, does she cuss up a storm. If that bothers you, move it on. Um, uh, I won't say who Major Moore is based on, but yes, she cusses like a sailor on shore leave. Um, if that doesn't bother anybody, it's not an advanced novel. I don't think my word choice is great for people who are that young. My daughter, who is 10, is trying to read Pure Poison, and occasionally she has to ask me words. I'm not going to say axe. She has to ask me words because I don't always pick word choice for preteen. Um, but teenagers, dadgum, this is a teenager easily novel, and and anybody should love it. I'm 55 and I love it. I want to read it twice. I've read it about
Hmm.
5 times. I think it's great. Um,
And he's not biased at all, people.
right. No, I was told a long time ago because I was writing an art novel, and Jadgy Lamplighter, my current editor, said, write what you like. Even if nobody else in the whole world reads it, write what you like. And I took that. It took a while because I kind of wanted everybody to like what I write. And then it occurred to me that no one's going to like everything I write. And why even care? And now at this point, I have reached the pinnacle of I'm writing this for me. I don't, I do care that everybody likes it. I care, but it's not going to change how I write it. This book is for me. It is a blast and it's fun. And if you like my novels, if you like this novel, you'll like all my novels. This is a blast.
Okay. And so before we let you go, dear listener, let me remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part. The writing process is sort of synergistic, and you have a role to play as well. And sharing the good word of the books you love. See, I can spell it, but
It's
saying some of
late.
these words,
Dude,
I'm
it's
like,
late, man. Oh God, you got to be
and we've
11
been
o'clock there already. Um,
Yeah, and we've been at it for an hour and 40 minutes. So, but yeah, so leave the
write
review, share your
reviews.
thoughts.
Write reviews. Go on Amazon. I'll send you a copy if you need one, but write a review for God's sake. And I don't mean just for mine. Read Declan's novels. Write reviews. Read anybody's novels. Write reviews. I don't care if your review is that's pretty good. Check. I prefer you put in 100 words or whatever, but you do it your way. Write a review.
Absolutely. All right. So, Hawkings Austin, we're going to go with the name that's going to be on the cover because I know you call yourself Hawk. But how can listeners find you on these wild, wild interwebs?
Okay, so I'm not all that out there. I do have a Facebook page, The Worlds of Hawkings Austin, because all my books are in a different world. And I like if you're on Twitter, I'm Sablehawk, SABLEHAWK, Sablehawk. That's
Sounds like a comic book hero.
what?
That sounds like a comic book hero.
Yeah, it's me. I happen to be a comic book hero.
In your other spare time.
Yeah, in my spare time. But yeah, and then what? Oh, the website sablehawk.org.
All right, and as usual, dear listener, you know the drill. We will leave those in the show notes where you can find all the things. You can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen over at facebook.com/blasters and blades podcast. Again, /groups/blasters and blades podcast. You can visit us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-tech-and-tag-blades. We actually do have a domain name that's going to be a landing page website, so it's not just the Anchor FM site. Doc was kind enough to purchase the domain name. Nobody had taken it yet, but we don't have anything there. So, but that is coming after DragonCon, of course, because everyone she knows is also associated with Dragon. So, yeah, they're going to be busy until mid-September when they come out of their Dragon coma. But if you want to support the show, you could do that on anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes. And since she's not here, we can call them all quitters today because, they're busy doing Dragon
There's three
stuff.
of you, right? There's three of you?
Yeah. We've got Nick Garber, who's a comic book artist and a Border Patrol agent who is busy doing stuff on the border. He's got some availability, dear listeners, since we're talking about that, to do potentially recorded episodes with just the three hosts. So we're going to try to fit some more of those in as well. Now that his availability is stabilized, we're going to work on rearranging some schedules to make that happen because it's always enjoyable when we get to chat with him. But before I prattle on too much longer, we want to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the aforementioned Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.